This photo of two friends seemed innocent, until historians noticed a dark secret. What appeared to be a simple snapshot of camaraderie captured a moment that would later unravel decades of carefully constructed lies. The truth behind the smiling faces would shake the foundations of an entire community's history. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Rain tapped against the windows of Dr. Natalie Chen's office at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, creating a soothing rhythm that accompanied her work. The January morning in Washington, D.C. had dawned gray and cold, but Natalie barely noticed, absorbed in her digital restoration project. Her fingers moved with practiced precision across the keyboard, adjusting contrast levels on a collection of historical photographs destined for the upcoming exhibition on American girlhood. "Just a bit more sharpness here," she murmured to herself, leaning closer to her monitor. The curator had been working on this collection for weeks, each image requiring meticulous attention to preserve its historical integrity while making details more visible to modern eyes. Her coffee had grown cold beside her when a particular photograph captured her attention. The sepia-toned portrait showed two young girls posed formally on the veranda of an antebellum Louisiana plantation. One girl, fair-skinned, in an elaborate dress with lace trim, sat in a wooden chair. The other, a black girl in simpler but still formal attire, stood beside her. Their hands were loosely clasped. Natalie recognized it immediately. The image had gained minor fame in academic circles as a rare depiction of interracial friendship in the pre-Civil War South. The Montgomery family had donated it to the Smithsonian in the 1970s, and it had been cited in several publications as evidence of occasional bonds that transcended the brutal realities of the plantation system. "Let's see what we can bring out," she whispered, zooming in on the details. The curator adjusted the image parameters, enhancing the resolution to examine the subjects more closely. Her eyes moved methodically across the frame, noting the stiff postures, the formal garden backdrop, the carefully arranged hands. When she reached the ankle of the black girl, Harriet, according to the cataloging notes, something caught her eye. What the original catalogers had described as an ornate bracelet or anklet seemed oddly substantial. Natalie increased the magnification further, adjusting the contrast to bring out the metalwork details. Her breath caught. The intricate scrollwork she had initially taken for decorative jewelry revealed itself as something else entirely. The metal band was too thick, too secure. The delicate floral pattern couldn't disguise its true purpose from her trained eye. "This isn't jewelry," Dr. Chen whispered, sitting back in her chair as the realization washed over her. "It's a shackle." She stared at the screen, her hands suddenly still. The ornate metalwork, disguised with careful craftsmanship to appear decorative, was unmistakably a restraint, a beautiful prison designed to be displayed in plain sight. The photograph, long celebrated as evidence of an unusual friendship, now revealed a much darker truth that had been hiding in plain sight for over a century and a half. Natalie stared at her computer screen, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. The ornate metalwork around Harriet's ankle wasn't decorative at all. It was a restraint, cleverly disguised as jewelry. A wave of nausea washed over her as the implications sank in. How had dozens of historians, curators, and researchers missed this detail for decades? The photograph had been displayed in multiple exhibitions, featured in textbooks, even celebrated in a Smithsonian publication on cross-cultural friendships. "This changes everything," she whispered to herself, removing her glasses to rub her tired eyes. What was once heralded as a rare example of interracial companionship in the antebellum South now revealed itself as something far more sinister, a disturbing display of psychological captivity dressed up as friendship. Dr. Chen pulled up the museum's digital acquisition records, scrolling through the metadata. The photograph had been donated with great fanfare by the Montgomery family in the early 70s, accompanied by a press release touting their ancestors' progressive values. The museum had accepted the narrative without question, eager to showcase a positive counterpoint to the brutality of plantation life. She printed the donation documents, spreading them across her desk. Every detail that had once seemed innocent now felt suspect. The careful positioning of the girl's hands, the way Caroline Montgomery stood slightly above Harriet, the forced smile on the enslaved girl's face. It wasn't friendship, it was ownership, carefully staged and documented. "What else have we missed?" Natalie murmured, opening a new search query in the museum's database. If this widely studied image contains such a significant oversight, how many other artifacts in their collection perpetuated false narratives? The curator reached for her phone to text Camille Wright. If anyone could help navigate the historical implications, it would be her colleague who specialized in Southern history. This wasn't just about correcting a caption or updating a display. This discovery challenged decades of institutional interpretation. Natalie felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. The Montgomery family remained influential donors, with a wing of the museum bearing their name. Questioning their family narrative would inevitably create tension with the administration, perhaps even threaten her position. Yet she couldn't unsee what she'd discovered. The evidence was right there, hidden in plain sight for over a century and a half. Dr. Chen gathered the printouts into a folder, her resolve hardening. She knew she stood at the edge of a precipice, professionally and ethically. To step back would be complicity. To move forward might cost her everything. But the truth about Harriet deserved to be told, no matter how uncomfortable it made people feel. Natalie took a deep breath and headed toward Dr. Mark's office. The damning folder clutched tightly against her chest. Dr. Natalie Chen slipped her access badge into the scanner, unlocking the heavy door to the Smithsonian's restricted archives. The temperature dropped several degrees as she entered, climate control to preserve fragile documents. Her footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as a staff archivist led her to a workstation. "The Montgomery family collection is extensive," the archivist explained, wheeling over 3 acid-free boxes. "Most researchers focus on their business records, not the personal effects." Natalie nodded, pulling on cotton gloves before carefully lifting the first box lid. Inside lay the meticulous documentation of Oakwood Plantation, ledgers recording cotton yields, correspondence with buyers in New Orleans, and inventories listing enslaved people alongside livestock and furniture. Her fingers moved methodically through yellowed papers, searching for any mention of Harriet or Caroline. The second box contained architectural plans and photographs of the plantation house near Baton Rouge. The curator paused at a faded sketch of the main gallery, the very backdrop of the photograph that had brought her here. Hours passed. Natalie's back ached from hunching over documents, but determination kept her going. In the third box, tucked between tax records and shipping manifests, she found a small manila envelope, its edges frayed with age. "This wasn't in the catalog," she murmured, carefully extracting the contents. A leather-bound diary emerged, its cover cracked but still intact. The curator held her breath as she opened to the first page. Written in careful script was an inscription, "For my dearest Caroline, 1853. Natalie's heart raced as she turned the brittle pages. Caroline Montgomery's handwriting started neat but grew more childlike as the entries progressed. The third entry made her freeze. "Mama brought home a surprise today, a girl named Harriet to be my companion. She is 9 years old like me, but very quiet. Mama says she is a gift to keep me from loneliness now that my sisters are at boarding school." The curator turned another page, her fingers trembling slightly. "Harriet sleeps in the small room beside mine. Papa had Mr. Jenkins make her a special bracelet so everyone knows she belongs at Oakwood." She cried when they put it on, but Mama says she'll get used to it. Natalie reached for her phone, photographing each page. 3 entries later, she found what she was looking for. Caroline had listed her birthday presents. New riding boots, a porcelain doll from France, and Mama says Harriet is officially mine now. She's written in the household book along with my pony and other things. The historian sat back, momentarily overwhelmed. What had been presented as friendship for over a century was now revealing itself as something far darker. A child's ownership of another child, documented in innocent handwriting. Natalie clutched the leather-bound diary in her hands, her knuckles almost white with tension. For 3 days, she had avoided bringing her discovery to Dr. Leonard Marks. Each morning, she arrived at the Smithsonian earlier than usual, slipping into her office to examine the evidence again, hoping she might be wrong. "You understand the gravity of what you're suggesting," Dr. Marks said, adjusting his glasses as he studied the enhanced photograph on Natalie's computer screen. His voice remained measured, professional, but she caught the undercurrent of concern. "I do," she replied, sliding the diary across his desk. "But the evidence is compelling. The ankle ornament isn't decorative jewelry, it's a restraint disguised as adornment." Dr. Marks leafed through the diary pages, his expression darkening. "The Montgomery Foundation funds our entire East Wing," he said finally. "Their family narrative has always centered on being progressive plantation owners. This directly contradicts that." "Truth isn't negotiable," Natalie said, more firmly than she intended. Her supervisor closed the diary and sighed. "Institutional sensitivities are at play here. The board will want absolute certainty before we make any claims that could damage our relationship with such prominent donors." Natalie opened a folder containing her preliminary research. Plantation records, inventory lists, the digital enhancements showing the unmistakable locking mechanism hidden in the ornate metalwork. "I've cross-referenced everything. The dates match, the names match, the location matches." Dr. Marks studied each document methodically. The silence in his office grew heavier with each passing minute. "Have you discussed this with anyone else?" he asked. "Not yet. I wanted to follow proper channels." He nodded, appreciating her discretion. "We'll need to assemble a review committee. This isn't something we can announce without thorough verification." "And if it's verified?" Natalie pressed. "Doctor." Marks removed his glasses, suddenly looking tired. "Then we face difficult conversations with the Montgomery family, the board, and the public. This photograph has been displayed in our American Girlhood collection for decades. Visitors have walked past it, seeing only what they expected to see, an unusual friendship." Natalie thought of the thousands who had viewed the image, never noticing what was literally in plain sight. "That's precisely why this matters," she said. "History isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to see." The curator placed the documents back in their folder with careful hands. "Prepare a formal presentation for the committee. Document everything. We'll proceed cautiously." He paused. "And Natalie, this won't be easy. The Montgomery name carries weight in Washington circles." She nodded, already feeling the weight of what was to come. The evidence was undeniable, but its implications would shake not just the museum, but the carefully constructed narrative of American history itself. After 3 days of methodical searching through the Federal Writers Project archives, Dr. Natalie Chen discovered what she'd been hoping for. Her fingers trembled as she carefully opened a dusty folder containing interviews with former slaves conducted during the Great Depression. There, among hundreds of testimonies, was an account from 1937 that made her heart race. Harriet Johnson, 89 years old when interviewed in New Orleans, had recounted her childhood at Oakwood Plantation with remarkable clarity. "I wasn't like the other children," the transcript read. "I belonged to Miss Caroline personal-like. Had to wear this shiny ankle chain, all fancy-made, so folks would know I was her special companion. Natalie read the words aloud, her voice barely above a whisper in the silent archive room. The elderly woman's description matched the photograph exactly. The ornate metal restraint disguised as jewelry, the forced proximity to Caroline, even the white dress she'd been made to wear. Caroline had all sorts of games, Harriet had told the interviewer. Most days I had to sit still while she practiced piano or reading. If I moved too much, the chain would jingle, and her mama would come see what the fuss was about. The curator carefully photographed each page of the testimony with her smartphone, her hands still unsteady. The details were unnervingly specific. The plantation's wide gallery where the photograph had been taken, the matching ribbons both girls wore, even Caroline's tendency to hold Harriet's hand for the camera, despite the chain between them. That picture man came twice a year, Harriet had recalled. Always wanted us posed like we was the best of friends. Miss Elizabeth, that's Caroline's mama, she'd have my chain polished special for those days. What struck Natalie most was how Harriet's voice had been preserved yet ignored. The interview had been properly cataloged, professionally transcribed, and stored in the National Archives for over 80 years. Researchers had accessed this file before. Notation cards showed at least 7 scholars had reviewed it since 1954. Yet no one had connected it to the famous photograph. Back in her office, Natalie carefully cross-referenced the details. The names, dates, and descriptions aligned perfectly. This wasn't just corroborating evidence. It was Harriet's own testimony, her lived experience finally breaking through decades of historical whitewashing. They heard her, Natalie whispered to herself, but they weren't listening. She printed the transcript and placed it beside the enhanced photograph on her desk. The voice of a woman who had died long ago now echoed through time, finally demanding to be heard. Harriet's testimony would no longer remain buried in the archives. Her truth would finally be acknowledged. Dr. Natalie Chen sat in her office, staring at the photograph that had upended her understanding of American history. This wasn't something she could tackle alone. The implications were too vast, the potential backlash too severe. She needed allies. Her first call was to Dr. Camille Wright, whose groundbreaking work on hidden narratives in southern plantations had earned her respect across academic circles. When Camille arrived at the Smithsonian the following day, Natalie spread her findings across the conference table. "I've been waiting for something like this to surface," Camille said, examining the enhanced image. "The practice has been whispered about in oral histories, but we've never had such clear visual evidence." Natalie nodded. "I need someone who understands the cultural context, someone who won't flinch when the Montgomery family lawyers start circling." "They certainly will," the historian replied with a knowing smile. "But truth doesn't bend to power, not forever." They needed technical expertise too. Marcus Holmes, a data scientist who had previously helped the museum digitize its Civil War archives, joined the team next. His specialty was pattern recognition, finding needles in historical haystacks. "We need to know if this was isolated or systematic," Natalie explained, showing him the ankle restraint. "Can your algorithms identify similar devices in other plantation photographs?" Marcus whistled low. "It's subtle, designed to look like jewelry to the casual observer. But machines don't have cultural blind spots. They just see patterns." For 3 weeks, the trio worked in near secrecy. Natalie secured special access to digital archives across 5 states. Camille provided historical context for each image, while Marcus refined his software to detect the telltale signs of disguised restraints. The results stunned them all. Marcus's program identified 43 photographs spanning from Virginia to Louisiana, each showing young black girls posed with white children. In every image, what appeared to be decorative ankle bracelets bore the same structural elements as Harriet's shackle. "It wasn't random," Camille said, her voice tight with emotion, as they reviewed the evidence. "This was a deliberate practice among wealthy families, keeping enslaved children as emotional companions for their daughters, disguising their bondage as ornamental. Marcus pointed to his screen. The design evolves but maintains core elements. Some are gold-plated, others silver. But the locking mechanism is consistent. Natalie felt a chill. We're looking at an entire hidden system of childhood enslavement, one that's been misinterpreted in museums nationwide as evidence of interracial friendship. The perfect cover story, Camille added. Who would question a narrative so comforting to the American conscience? The team compiled their preliminary findings into a report. Their hypothesis was clear and disturbing. Companion enslavement represented a widespread, deliberately concealed practice among the Southern elite, hidden in plain sight for over a century and a half. The data spoke volumes, even as voices around the Smithsonian grew louder in dissent. Dr. Natalie Chen and her team had compiled a report that sent tremors through the museum's marble halls. Digital enhancements of 43 photographs revealed the same disturbing pattern. Ornate metal restraints disguised as jewelry on young black girls posed with white children. These could simply be decorative anklets, argued Dr. Raymond Whitfield, the museum's senior photography curator, during an emergency staff meeting. We're projecting modern sensibilities onto 19th century fashion. His fingers drummed nervously on the conference table as he spoke. Natalie remained composed but firm. The consistent placement, the hidden clasping mechanisms, the correlation with plantation records, these aren't coincidences. She gestured to Marcus Holmes' data visualization displayed on the wall screen, showing geographical clusters of the images across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Georgia. The debate intensified as institutional concerns surfaced. Dr. Leonard Marks cleared his throat before speaking. The Montgomery Foundation contributes $2 million annually to our educational programs. We need absolute certainty before proceeding. Truth isn't measured by donor dollars, Camille Wright interjected, her voice steady but edged with controlled frustration. The historian had spent 3 sleepless nights cross-referencing plantation inventories with the photographic evidence. 2 days later, Natalie and Camille found themselves before the Smithsonian's. Eleanor Winters, the committee chair, said, "But the interpretive risk is substantial. What you're suggesting would fundamentally rewrite our understanding of antebellum childhood documentation." Camille leaned forward. "That's precisely the point. These images have been misinterpreted for generations." A silver-haired committee member adjusted his glasses. "The public backlash could be severe. Many will accuse us of manufacturing controversy." "With respect," Natalie responded, "our job isn't to protect comfortable narratives, but to present historical truth." The committee exchanged glances before Dr. Winters delivered their verdict. "We need more. Something definitive, written records explicitly connecting these restraints to control, rather than decoration. First-person accounts, manufacturer evidence." As they left the meeting, Natalie felt the weight of institutional resistance pressing down. In the hallway, she turned to Camille. "They're hoping we'll give up." Camille shook her head. "They don't understand what's at stake. This isn't just about one photograph anymore." Marcus was waiting for them near Natalie's office, his laptop open. "I've identified 3 more images from private collections," he said without preamble. "Same pattern, same era." Natalie nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "Then keep digging. If they want more proof, we'll find it." Dr. Camille Wright spent 3 exhausting days in the Louisiana State Archives, her fingers growing numb from turning brittle pages. The historian's methodical approach finally paid dividends when she discovered a hidden collection of letters exchanged between 5 prominent plantation families across Louisiana and Mississippi. "Natalie, you need to see these," Camille said, her voice tight with emotion as she spread the correspondence across the table in their temporary research room. The letters, dating from 1840 to 1855, revealed a disturbing network of communication between the matriarchs of these wealthy households. The women wrote candidly about what they called companion management, sharing advice on everything from training methods to punishment techniques. Most disturbing were their detailed discussions of restraint designs, ornate shackles disguised as jewelry that would prevent escape while maintaining the illusion of normalcy. One letter, written in elegant script on monogram stationery, proved particularly damning. Elizabeth Montgomery, Caroline's mother, had written to her cousin in Natchez, "I've commissioned Mr. Beaumont, the jeweler on Royal Street, to craft a delicate ankle cuff for our Harriet. The design blends necessity with decorum, gold filigree that catches the light beautifully while ensuring she remains where she belongs. Caroline is so attached to her companion that I fear what might happen should the girl attempt to flee." Natalie Chen read the letter twice, her stomach churning. "This wasn't just the Montgomerys," she whispered. "This was systematic." The correspondence revealed a chilling pattern. When daughters reached age 7 or 8, mothers would select an enslaved girl of similar age as a companion. The girls would be dressed well, educated alongside their owners' children, and trained to provide emotional support, all while wearing disguised restraints. "Look at this," Camille pointed to another letter. They exchanged tips on how to maintain the girl's emotional dependence. One woman boasts that her daughter's companion weeps at the mere suggestion of separation. They weaponized attachment. Marcus Holmes joined them later that afternoon, bringing his laptop to digitize the most significant letters. "This changes everything," the data scientist said, carefully photographing Elizabeth Montgomery's letter. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a deliberate social practice. The team worked late into the night, piecing together a network of complicity that spanned generations. What had once been dismissed as a curious anomaly in the photograph now revealed itself as evidence of a calculated system, one that exploited not just physical labor, but emotional bonds. "They knew exactly what they were doing," Natalie said, staring at Elizabeth's elegant handwriting. "They created an illusion of friendship to mask what was really happening. And they did it so—" Marcus Holmes sat hunched over his computer, his eyes burning from hours of staring at digitized 19th-century auction records. 3 days earlier, Natalie had asked him to search for patterns in slave sales across Louisiana and Mississippi. What he found exceeded their darkest expectations. "Dr. Chen, you need to see this," Marcus called, his voice tight with tension. Natalie hurried over, leaning in as he pointed to his screen. These auction ledgers from New Orleans and Natchez in the 1850s show a disturbing price pattern. The data scientist had isolated entries where young enslaved girls, primarily between ages 7 and 12, were labeled with an innocuous-sounding designation, companion trained. These children consistently sold for 15 to 20% above market rates for field laborers of similar age. "The price differential is statistically significant," Marcus explained, scrolling through his analysis. "These girls were commodities with added value, specifically prepared for a specialized role in wealthy households." Natalie felt a chill as she studied the meticulous columns of figures. One entry from a May 1854 auction in New Orleans listed, "Girl, age 9, companion trained, excellent deportment and manners," selling for an astronomical sum to the Beaumont family. "It was an entire industry," she whispered. "They were training these children specifically to serve as emotional surrogates." Dr. Camille Wright joined them, her expertise in Southern history providing crucial context. "This explains the behavioral conditioning mentioned in those plantation letters we found," the historian noted. "These girls weren't just randomly selected. They were deliberately molded to provide friendship, entertainment, and emotional labor for white daughters." The team worked late into the evening, cross-referencing auction records with plantation inventories. They discovered multiple instances where companion girls were listed separately from field workers, often categorized alongside valuable household items rather than with other enslaved people. The Montgomery family ledgers show they purchased Harriet through one of these specialized auctions, Natalie said, connecting the historical dots. "The photograph we've been studying isn't documenting friendship, it's showcasing ownership." The curator stared at the infamous image on her desk. Caroline Montgomery's casual pose beside Harriet now revealed its true nature. Not companionship, but possession. A relationship built on the commodification of childhood itself. The most insidious part, Camille added, her voice heavy, is how this system thrived on the illusion of benevolence. White families could convince themselves they were being kind while maintaining absolute control. Marcus, no. And the higher prices show how valued this particular form of enslavement was. These families weren't just buying labor. They were purchasing emotional comfort for their daughters. Natalie gathered the printouts, her resolve hardening. This changes everything about how we present this photograph. It's not just about the shackle anymore. It's about exposing an entire hidden system that's been romanticized for over a century and a half. Word of Natalie's research spread faster than she anticipated. On a Tuesday morning, Dr. Leonard Marks appeared at her office door, his typically composed face tight with concern. "The Montgomery family knows," he said, closing the door behind him. "Their attorney called the director an hour ago." By afternoon, an official letter arrived from Charles Montgomery III, representing the Montgomery Foundation. The language was precise and threatening. Allegations of defamation, historical revisionism, and reckless damage to a distinguished American legacy. The attorney demanded immediate cessation of the research project and a formal retraction of any preliminary findings. "They're claiming we've misinterpreted the photograph," Natalie told Camille over coffee in the museum cafeteria. According to them, the ankle piece was a fashionable ornament that Caroline's father brought back from Europe. "Convenient explanation," Dr. Wright replied, shaking her head. "Too bad we have the jeweler's records proving otherwise." The situation escalated the following day when 3 board members requested an emergency meeting. Natalie sat at the long conference table, feeling the weight of institutional politics bearing down. The museum's development director laid out the stakes bluntly. The Montgomery Foundation had pledged $4 million toward the Smithsonian's Eastern Wing expansion. That funding was now explicitly contingent on responsible handling of the plantation photograph research. "We're not suggesting you abandon your work," one board member said carefully, "but perhaps a more nuanced interpretation is warranted." Natalie looked around the room, noting the divided expressions. Half the administrators appeared genuinely conflicted, while others seemed determined to protect the institution's relationships with its benefactors at all costs. "The evidence is clear," she insisted, sliding her digital enhancement across the table. "This isn't about interpretation. It's about acknowledging what's literally in the frame." Dr. Marks cleared his throat. "The board recognizes your diligence, Natalie, but we must consider the broader implications. The Montgomery family has been a cornerstone of our support for decades." Later that evening, Natalie received a call from Marcus. "You need to see this," he said. "I found 3 more photographs from the same plantation with similar decorative restraints. Different girls, same disguised shackles." As she hung up, her phone buzzed with an email from the museum director. "Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Montgomery representatives will attend." Natalie stared at her reflection in the darkened computer screen. The truth about Harriet's shackle was becoming a test of the institution's integrity and her own. Tomorrow would determine whether historical honesty could withstand the pressure of wealth and influence that had kept this secret hidden for over a century and a half. The boardroom at the Smithsonian felt like a diplomatic summit as Dr. Natalie Chen sat across from museum administrators and legal representatives. After 3 weeks of heated discussions, emergency meetings, and countless emails, they had finally reached what the board called an acceptable middle ground. "We'll mount the exhibition with the photograph as centerpiece," explained Dr. Leonard Marks, leaning forward in his chair. "But all interpretive materials must undergo review by our expanded committee, which will include a Montgomery family representative." Natalie's stomach tightened. She watched the museum director nod approvingly while Charles Montgomery III, in his immaculate suit, made notes on a leather-bound planner. The attorney had softened his approach since the evidence had become overwhelming, but his presence still felt like a threat. "The Montgomerys are willing to withdraw legal action," Leonard continued, "provided they have input on how we frame the narrative. They're particularly concerned about language suggesting the diary entries, the jeweler's ledger. Which is why we're proceeding with the exhibition at all," interrupted the museum director. "But context matters, Dr. Chen. The Montgomery Foundation funds educational initiatives across 3 states. We need to be judicious." The compromise felt hollow. Natalie had imagined an unflinching examination of how wealth and power had sanitized history. Now she feared they would produce something tepid, full of qualifiers and euphemisms. Later that afternoon, she paced her office, surrounded by digital prints and transcripts, evidence that had seemed so irrefutable. Dr. Camille Wright found her there, staring out the window at the Washington Monument in the distance. "They'll water it down," Natalie said without turning. "All this work, and they'll make it palatable for donors." Camille closed the door behind her. "I've been through this before," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "At the African American History Museum, we faced similar pressure with the lynching exhibition." "What did you do?" Natalie asked. "We used their own rules against them. Even context is a weapon, if used honestly." Camille moved beside her colleague. "We'll document every edit they request. We'll ensure the facts remain central, even if the language softens. And remember, the photograph speaks for itself. That ankle shackle tells its own truth." Natalie considered this. Perhaps victory wouldn't look like she'd imagined. Perhaps it would be measured in small revelations, in quiet moments of recognition, as visitors confronted what had been hidden for generations. "We accept their compromise," she finally said, "but we don't compromise the truth." Camille nodded. "That's all history ever asks of us." With the exhibition finally approved, Dr. Natalie Chen and her team began the painstaking process of gathering artifacts and testimonies that would bring the full story to light. The museum's initial reluctance had given way to cautious support, though Natalie knew they were still walking a tightrope between truth and institutional comfort. "We need more than just our research," Natalie told Camille one afternoon as they reviewed potential exhibition materials. "We need tangible connections to these girls' lives." As if answering their need, Gloria Thompson reached out after reading a small article about their project in an education journal. The Baltimore teacher explained that her family had preserved stories about her great-great-grandmother Rachel, who had been a companion on a Mississippi plantation. When Gloria arrived at the Smithsonian with a small velvet box, Natalie and Camille welcomed her into a quiet conference room. Dr. Wright offered tea while Natalie prepared recording equipment to document the meeting. "This has been passed down through 5 generations," Gloria said, her hands steady as she opened the box. Inside lay an ornate gold cuff, its intricate filigree disguising its true purpose. "My grandmother told me it was both beautiful and terrible. Beauty to hide its function." Natalie carefully examined the artifact, her heart racing. The craftsmanship was unmistakable, the same delicate scrollwork, the same hidden locking mechanism that appeared in the photograph of Harriet. "May I?" she asked, before comparing digital images side by side. The similarity was undeniable. "This is extraordinary," Camille whispered. "The first physical corroboration outside the Montgomery collection." Gloria nodded, her eyes reflecting generations of unspoken pain. "Rachel was given to a girl named Elizabeth on her 10th birthday. My grandmother said Rachel would tell her daughters that she learned to love the girl who owned her, and that was the cruelest part." The historian took notes as Gloria shared family stories, how Rachel had escaped during the chaos of the Civil War, how she'd kept the cuff as proof of what she'd survived, how each mother had passed it down with the instruction, "Remember, but don't be bound by it." Marcus joined them later, carefully documenting the cuff with specialized equipment. "The metallurgical composition matches other jewelry from New Orleans workshops of that era," he confirmed. For the exhibition design, they decided Gloria's testimony would play alongside a display of the cuff, positioned near the central photograph. Her voice, strong, clear, and carrying the weight of her ancestors' experience, would provide visitors with the human reality behind the historical evidence. "My family has carried this story for generations," Gloria said as she prepared to leave. "It's time everyone else carried it too." Natalie knew then that Gloria's contribution would become the emotional anchor of Hidden in Plain Sight, the living connection between past and present that visitors couldn't possibly ignore. The Smithsonian's communications team assembled in the conference room, surrounded by press releases and social media drafts. Their faces reflected the gravity of what lay ahead. Within hours of the first press announcement about the exhibition, the museum's phone lines lit up like Christmas trees. "We're being called historical revisionists," said the communications director, sliding a printout across the table to Dr. Natalie Chen. The headline from a conservative news outlet screamed, "Smithsonian rewrites history for political points." Natalie scanned the article, her stomach tightening. The piece quoted Charles Montgomery III extensively, who claimed the museum was smearing a respected American family to appease modern sensibilities. Other descendants of Southern plantation owners had joined the chorus, threatening to withdraw millions in planned donations. 3 major donors have already pulled out, Dr. Leonard Marks informed the team, his voice strained. The board is concerned about the expansion project. He didn't need to spell out the implications. Years of planning might collapse without that funding. Outside the museum, protesters gathered with signs defending Southern heritage. Television crews captured the spectacle, further amplifying the controversy. Conservative commentators questioned the methodology, suggesting that the ankle ornament might simply be misinterpreted jewelry. Yet for every voice of opposition, another rose in support. Dr. Camille Wright appeared on several news programs, her measured expertise lending credibility to the exhibition. "What we're witnessing," she explained to a national audience, "is not rewriting history, but revealing what was deliberately obscured." Black community organizations organized visits to the exhibition. Educators developed curriculum materials around the photograph. Historians from universities across America signed an open letter praising the Smithsonian's courage in confronting uncomfortable truths. "The emails are running 2-to-1 in our favor," Marcus Holmes reported after analyzing public feedback. "And they're not just F." Social media buzzed with hashtags like Hidden in Plain Sight and See the Truth. Museums in Atlanta, Charleston, and New Orleans received public pressure to examine their own collections for similar overlooked evidence. Gloria Thompson's television interview, where she displayed her family's gold cuff and shared her great-great-grandmother's story, went viral. Her quiet dignity in the face of historical pain resonated with millions of viewers. "This isn't about erasing history," Natalie found herself repeating in interview after interview. "It's about seeing it completely for perhaps the first time." As the controversy intensified, the museum stood at the center of a national conversation about historical memory, institutional responsibility, and the power of objects to conceal or reveal truth. What began as one curator's discovery was evolving into something much larger, a reckoning with how America remembers its past and who gets to control that narrative. The package arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Natalie Chen was reviewing exhibition layouts with her team when the museum receptionist delivered the small, battered cardboard box postmarked from Savannah. The return address bore the name Eleanor Montgomery Pearson. "I found this while clearing my grandmother's attic," read the enclosed note. "After seeing the news about your exhibition, I believe this belongs in your hands, not hidden away in Georgia." Natalie carefully removed the protective tissue paper to reveal a small leather-bound book, its spine cracked with age, the pages yellowed and fragile. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the faded inscription on the first page. "Caroline Montgomery, Oakwood Plantation, 1853. "It's her diary," she whispered, looking up at Camille Wright, who had entered the office. Caroline's actual diary. The historian moved closer, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. This could change everything about our understanding of their relationship. Over the next 3 days, Natalie and Camille meticulously photographed and transcribed the diary's contents, working late into the night. The entries began innocently enough, the musings of a 12-year-old privileged girl detailing plantation life, her studies and family events. The diary revealed a mind shaped by the institution of slavery, while still capable of genuine affection. "Harriet cried today when Mother had the jeweler fit her ankle piece," read one entry. "I told her it was beautiful and that all the finest ladies in France wear such things." But it was an entry from September that struck Natalie most profoundly. "Sometimes I wish Harriet didn't need the chain, but Mother says it helps people know she's mine. We had our portrait made today in our matching dresses. Harriet smiled just as I taught her. This is the exact day the photograph was taken," Natalie said, pointing to the date. "The smoking gun." Marcus Holmes arrived with coffee to find both women silent, staring at the diary. "What is it?" he asked. "The final piece," Camille replied. "This isn't just about physical restraint. It's about psychological ownership, the normalization of possession disguised as affection." Natalie carefully closed the diary, her mind racing with the implications for their exhibition. "The true horror isn't just the shackle itself," she said quietly. "It's that Caroline genuinely believed she loved Harriet, even while keeping her chained." Marcus Holmes hunched over his laptop in the dimly lit corner of the Smithsonian Archives, his eyes burning from hours of scrolling through digitized historical documents. The data scientist had been searching for the final piece of evidence that would cement their case beyond any doubt. When he found it, his hand froze over the mouse. "Natalie," he called out, his voice echoing through the quiet space, "I think this is it." "Doctor." Natalie Chen rushed over, coffee cup in hand, as Marcus pointed to his screen. There, in elegant cursive handwriting, was a jeweler's ledger from 1852, belonging to Beaumont and Sons of New Orleans. The digital scan revealed page after page of meticulous entries, including a section labeled Specialty Commissions. "Look at this category," Marcus said, highlighting a column. "Ankle adornments for household companions." They weren't even trying to hide it. They just used euphemisms. Natalie leaned closer, her breath catching as she spotted an entry from March 3rd. "Mrs. Elizabeth Montgomery of Oakwood Plantation. 1 gold ankle cuff with decorative filigree and concealed locking mechanism. Specified requirements: must appear ornamental to casual observation while ensuring secure fastening." "This is exactly what we needed," Natalie whispered. "Direct proof of intent." The ledger contained dozens of similar commissions from prominent Southern families, each requesting variations on the same theme: restraints disguised as jewelry. Some entries included detailed sketches showing how the locking mechanisms could be hidden beneath decorative elements. Dr. Camille Wright arrived later that afternoon, her expression shifting from skepticism to conviction as she examined the digital evidence. The language is unmistakable. The historian noted, "These weren't just fashion accessories. The ledger specifically mentions secure fastening and prevention of removal. This was a deliberate system." With this discovery, their evidentiary chain was complete. They now had visual evidence from the photograph, oral testimony from Harriet Johnson's 1937 interview, documentary evidence from Caroline's diary and plantation correspondence, physical artifacts through Gloria Thompson's family heirloom, and now commercial records confirming the deliberate. "We can present an unassailable case now," Natalie said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. "Not just about one photograph or one plantation, but about a widespread practice that was hidden in plain sight." Marcus saved multiple copies of the ledger pages, backing them up to secure servers. "No one can dismiss this as speculative or circumstantial anymore," he said. "The Montgomery Commission is right there in black and white. As the team gathered their findings, Natalie felt a weight lifting. After months of institutional resistance and threats from the Montgomery family, they finally had evidence that could withstand any scrutiny. The exhibition would now tell a complete story, one that had been waiting 170 years to be fully revealed. The Smithsonian's Grand Hall buzzed with hushed conversations as Dr. Natalie Chen straightened her blazer one final time. After months of controversy, threats, and sleepless nights, the exhibition, hidden in plain sight, was finally opening to the public. The January evening had brought a chill to Washington, D.C., but inside, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Visitors filed in steadily, their reflections ghosting across the glass displays. At the center of the exhibition stood the infamous photograph of Caroline Montgomery and Harriet, now properly contextualized. The sepia-toned image that had once been celebrated as proof of antebellum friendship was now revealed for what it truly was, evidence of a sophisticated system of childhood captivity. "We chose not to alter the lighting on the shackle," Natalie explained to a reporter. "We wanted people to see how easily it had been overlooked." Beside the photograph, Harriet's oral testimony from the Federal Writers Project was displayed in full, her words finally given the prominence they deserved after decades of obscurity. Dr. Camille Wright stood nearby, discreetly observing visitors' reactions. The historian had insisted on including Gloria Thompson's family heirloom, the gold cuff that matched Harriet's shackle exactly, in a separate display case. The physical artifact provided undeniable material evidence that the practice extended beyond the Montgomery plantation. "I never thought I'd live to see this," whispered an elderly woman, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. She introduced herself as a distant relative of one of the companion girls documented in Marcus Holmes's research. Across the room, a silver-haired man from the Montgomery family stood rigidly, his expression unreadable as he confronted his family's legacy. The most powerful moments came when descendants from both sides of the photograph's history encountered each other in the exhibition space. Tentative conversations began, painful acknowledgments were made. A Montgomery cousin reached for the hand of a companion descendant, words failing where touch spoke volumes. Dr. Leonard Marks circulated among major donors, his earlier caution now transformed into careful pride. "This is what museums should do," he admitted quietly to Natalie, "even when it's difficult." As the evening progressed, visitors lingered longest at the wall of testimonies. Dozens of accounts from companion girls and their descendants, collected during the research process. Many stood in silence, tissues pressed to faces, the weight of historical erasure finally lifted through collective witnessing. Natalie caught Gloria Thompson's eye across the room. The teacher had brought her entire family, 3 generations standing together before the exhibition that their ancestors' suffering had helped bring to light. In that moment, despite the controversy that still swirled outside the museum's walls, Natalie knew with absolute certainty that the truth had been worth fighting for. The media storm hit with hurricane force. Within 48 hours of the exhibition's opening, every major news outlet in America had covered the story. The Washington Post ran a front-page feature with the headline, "Hidden Shackles: America's Forgotten History of Companion Slavery." CNN aired a special report featuring interviews with descendants of both enslaved companions and plantation owners. Dr. Natalie Chen watched in astonishment as museums across the South began responding. The Charleston Museum announced a 6-month closure of its antebellum wing for comprehensive historical reassessment. Similar announcements followed from Richmond's American Civil War Museum and Atlanta History Center. What had begun as one curator's discovery was triggering a nationwide reckoning. "I never expected this scale of response," Natalie confessed to Camille Wright over coffee in the Smithsonian cafeteria. The historian smiled knowingly. "Truth has momentum," she replied. "Once it starts moving, it's hard to stop." Academic institutions scramble to catch up. The Journal of American History announced a special issue dedicated to companion enslavement patterns. 3 universities launched research initiatives to identify similar photographs in their collections. Professors contacted Marcus Holmes, requesting access to his pattern recognition methodology. Each morning, Natalie's inbox overflowed with messages. Museum curators from Texas to Virginia sent images of questionable friendship portraits in their collections. Teachers asked for educational materials to help explain the discovery. Most moving were emails from descendants of companion girls sharing family stories long dismissed as unreliable. "My great-grandmother spoke of a special chain she wore as a child," wrote a woman from Mississippi. "No one believed her. We thought she was confused about a bracelet. Now I know she was telling the truth all along." Dr. Leonard Marks, who had initially cautioned restraint, now acknowledged the exhibition's importance. "Sometimes institutions need to be uncomfortable to move forward," he admitted during a staff meeting. The Montgomery family remained publicly silent, though Charles Montgomery III had withdrawn all legal threats after the overwhelming evidence became public. Their foundation quiet. By month's end, 17 additional photographs with disguised restraints had been identified in collections across the country. Plantation museums in Louisiana began revising their tour scripts. Textbook publishers contacted the Smithsonian about updating their Civil War-era chapters. "It's like watching dominoes fall," Marcus observed as he showed Natalie the latest data visualization of affected institutions. She nodded, both exhausted and exhilarated. "This was never just about one photograph or one family," she said. "It was about everything we choose not to see." 1 month after the exhibition's opening, Dr. Natalie Chen stood quietly in the corner of the gallery, observing a class of 5th graders from Woodrow Wilson Elementary as they moved through the Hidden in Plain Sight exhibit. The children's faces reflected a mixture of curiosity and confusion as their teacher guided them through America's uncomfortable truths. A small girl with braided hair, no more than 10 years old, stopped in front of the centerpiece photograph. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, her brow furrowed as she studied the sepia-toned image of Caroline and Harriet. The ornate metal around Harriet's ankle gleamed even in the old photograph, deliberately crafted to appear decorative rather than restrictive. "But friends don't wear chains, right?" the child asked, her voice carrying through the hushed gallery. Every adult within earshot froze, the innocent question cutting through layers of historical obfuscation with devastating clarity. The girl's teacher, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, knelt beside her. "That's exactly the important question this whole exhibit is asking us to think about," she explained gently. "Sometimes in history, things that looked like friendship weren't equal or fair. The little girl in this picture wasn't allowed to leave or make her own choices." Natalie watched as understanding dawned on the children's faces, unfiltered, uncomplicated by the justifications adults often constructed. One boy asked if the girl in the picture ever got free. Another wondered if Caroline knew she was doing something wrong. These were the questions that mattered, the curator realized, not the institutional politics or funding concerns that had consumed months of her professional life, but these fundamental human inquiries about freedom, friendship, and responsibility. As the class moved to the next display featuring Gloria Thompson's family heirloom, Natalie caught the eye of their teacher. The woman gave her a small, knowing nod, an acknowledgement between educators of different kinds. In that moment, all the professional isolation, the threats from the Montgomery family, the tense meetings with Dr. Marks and the board, all of it felt worth the cost. The next generation would grow up seeing what generations before had chosen to ignore. They would recognize the difference between genuine friendship and possession disguised as affection. These children would never look at historical photographs the same way again. They would question, examine, and seek the stories hidden in plain sight. And in that simple achievement, Natalie found a profound sense of purpose that transcended all the controversy. The truth, once seen, could never be unseen. Dr. Natalie Chen sat alone in her office, watching raindrops trace patterns down the window. not unlike the pattern she'd uncovered in history. 6 months had passed since the exhibition opened, and the personal cost had been steep. Colleagues who once stopped by for coffee now averted their eyes in hallways. Her inbox contained as many threats as congratulations. The Montgomery Foundation had withdrawn all funding from her department, creating a chill that extended beyond mere finances. Yet for every door that closed, others had opened. Universities across the country now requested her presence at lectures and symposiums. The curator found herself speaking to packed auditoriums at Harvard, Howard, and UCLA, where students hungered for discussions about ethical curation and historical responsibility. The truth isn't always comfortable, Natalie told a crowd in Baltimore last week. But comfort has never been history's purpose. Dr. Wright had become more than a colleague, a true friend who understood the isolation that came with challenging institutional narratives. Their weekly calls sustained Natalie through the darkest moments of doubt. "You've changed how an entire generation will understand American history," Camille had reminded her yesterday. "That's worth every battle." The data scientist Marcus had parlayed their research into a groundbreaking software program now being adopted by museums nationwide, technology designed to identify hidden patterns in historical photographs and documents. His success felt like validation of their shared mission. Even Dr. Marks had come around, albeit reluctantly. The supervisor who once warned about institutional sensitivities now cited their exhibition in funding proposals, positioning the museum as a leader in historical transparency. The most meaningful responses came from families like Gloria Thompson's, descendants who finally saw their ancestors' experiences acknowledged. Each letter Natalie received from these families reinforced her resolve. One elderly woman from Mississippi had written, "My grandmother never spoke about her mother's childhood. Now I understand why. Thank you for giving us back our story." Natalie's calendar for the coming year was filled with speaking engagements at institutions that had initially condemned her work. Her transformation from cautious curator to outspoken advocate hadn't been planned, but it felt inevitable now, necessary. As she packed her briefcase for tomorrow's lecture at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Natalie paused at the framed photograph on her desk. Not the infamous plantation image, but a snapshot from opening night. In it, Gloria Thompson stood beside her, both women gazing at the exhibition with tears and determination in their eyes. The curator, who had once feared disrupting the status quo, now embraced her role as its challenger. Some prices were worth paying. Some truths demanded to be seen. The traveling exhibition, hidden in plain sight, moved through America's cultural landscape like a quiet storm. From Boston to Chicago, San Francisco to Austin, the infamous photograph of Caroline Montgomery and Harriet stood as testimony to history's deliberate blind spots. Dr. Natalie Chen attended the opening at each new location, watching as visitors confronted not just the image, but their own assumptions about the past. In Atlanta, a woman in her 70s approached Natalie with trembling hands. "My grandmother had a similar photograph," she whispered. "I always wondered about the girl beside her." This scene repeated itself across the country. Family albums reopened, attic trunks searched, forgotten diaries reread with new understanding. The curator had ignited a national re-examination that spread far beyond museum walls. Museums nationwide began reviewing their own collections with fresh eyes. At the Charleston Historical Society, 3 more photographs with disguised restraints were identified. The New Orleans Museum of Southern History discovered a jeweler's mold for companion bracelets in their artifacts collection, previously labeled as children's jewelry. Dr. Camille Wright led workshops for curators and historians, teaching them to recognize the visual language of concealed oppression. These weren't isolated incidents, she would explain, pointing to the mounting evidence. This was systematic, hidden by design, not by accident. Marcus Holmes developed an open-source image recognition tool that helped smaller institutions analyze their own archives. The database grew weekly as more visual evidence emerged from private collections and regional museums. What began as one photograph had blossomed into a comprehensive historical record. The Montgomery family, after initial resistance, took an unexpected turn. Charles's daughter, Elizabeth, broke ranks with her family to fund educational programs. "We can't change our ancestors' actions," she stated at a press conference, "but we can change how honestly we face them." For Gloria Thompson, the exhibition brought closure. She placed her great-great-grandmother's gold cuff in the permanent collection, where it would remain as tangible evidence of what had once been dismissed as impossible. "My family carried this truth for generations," she told a group of students. "Now the world carries it with us." On the one-year anniversary of her discovery, Natalie stood before a packed auditorium at Georgetown University. "The most dangerous lies in history," she said, "aren't those that are told, but those that are seen and not recognized." The curator looked out at the faces before her, students, historians, descendants, all forever changed by what they now could see. The photograph's power was no longer in what it concealed, but in what it revealed. That truth often waits in plain sight, patient for the moment when someone finally looks closely enough to see it.